Her mother's words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sharp ripples spreading through her chest. When she heard, "You are not even half the woman your sister is," something inside her clenched so tightly she could barely breathe. For years she had swallowed these comparisons, forcing a smile or staying silent, but this time a strange calm rose in her. She pushed her chair back slowly, the scrape of wood against tile cutting through the hum of dinner conversation. Her voice was quiet yet steady when she answered, "Then let her pay the rent for you." The room froze. Her father blinked as if someone had switched off the light behind his eyes. He stammered, "Rent? What rent?" And with that question, the secret she had carried for 3 long years began to spill into the open like water breaking through a cracked dam. Her name was Amelia Hart, though most called her Millie. 28 years old, she lived in a rented apartment in the center of Rosewood, a city bustling near the harbor. From the outside, her life looked tidy and predictable. A stable career as a financial manager at a logistics company, evenings spent with a small circle of friends, and weekends filled with grocery runs and quiet nights. But every Friday, when she returned to her parents' suburban home for the weekly family dinner, her carefully built stability wavered. Dinner at her parents' table was never optional. No matter how long her work week dragged on, or how much she longed for solitude, the family rule remained unbreakable. If she tried to excuse herself, her mother would call endlessly until she answered, or her father would deliver his usual line, "This family has a seat for you, do not leave it empty." So week after week, she slid into her chair at the long wooden table, enduring the rhythm of conversations that always seemed to circle back to her older sister. Clara, 3 years older, had been crowned the family's golden child from the moment she could walk into a room and command attention. She had been captain of the high school debate team, winner of scholarships, and eventually graduate of one of the most respected law programs in the state. Her parents often described her as destined for greatness, their pride woven into every sentence they spoke about her. The spotlight had followed Clara naturally, while Amelia, who found joy in numbers and quiet work rather than applause, had grown accustomed to being the background. On the surface, Amelia never complained. She accepted her role and carried herself with quiet dignity, reminding herself she did not need grand recognition to know her worth. Yet the comparisons left scars she rarely admitted. When the family praised Clara's new house or her latest case at the firm, Amelia swallowed bites of food with bitterness that no seasoning could mask. She remembered every late night of her teenage years, working part-time to fund her own education, every sacrifice to make her way into adulthood without leaning on anyone. She had even offered silent support when her parents' finances faltered, but none of that ever surfaced at the dinner table. That evening had unfolded like so many before it. Wine glasses clinked as her parents praised Clara's new home and decorating plans. Her father declared she deserved it, her mother added proudly, "Clara makes us proud, she carries the family name with honor." Amelia, as usual, sat quietly, tracing circles on her plate with her fork, her thoughts drifting between resentment and resignation. Then her mother set her fork down, looked at Amelia with an expression colder than winter air, and delivered the cruel line, "You are not even half the woman your sister Island." Instead of collapsing under the weight of those words, Amelia found herself standing taller inside. She locked eyes with her mother, then glanced at Clara's smug smile, and answered in a tone so icy it silenced the room, "Then let her pay the rent for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara blinked in confusion, her parents' expressions crumbled, and her father's voice wavered as he asked, "Rent? What rent?" Amelia's heart pounded, yet her voice carried with surprising steadiness. For 3 years, she revealed, she had been sending money every month to cover the mortgage on the very house they sat in. The truth uncoiled from her like smoke filling a sealed room, impossible to contain now that it had begun. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Amelia could feel her pulse thundering at her temples, but she refused to look away. Her father's face drained of color, his hand frozen around his glass of wine, as though letting go might shatter the fragile illusion they had built. Her mother blinked rapidly, her lips parting but no sound escaping. Clara shifted in her seat, clearly caught between disbelief and discomfort, her triumphant smile vanishing. Amelia's voice, though trembling inside, did not falter as she repeated, "For 3 years I have been sending money to keep this house standing. When you lost contracts, when the bank sent notices, when the roof over your heads was ready to slip away, it was me who made the transfers. The memory of the night it began flashed across her mind like a reel of film. She had been 25, weary from another long day at the office, when her phone buzzed. Her mother's voice on the other end shook with panic. "We might lose the house," she said. "Your father's project fell through, and we cannot cover the mortgage this month." Amelia had felt her chest seize with dread. That house was more than just walls. It was where she had grown up, where her earliest memories lived. Without hesitating too long, she promised to help. "Just this once," her mother had whispered. "We will find a way next month." The next morning, Amelia transferred the money, convincing herself it was a temporary sacrifice. But months bled into years, and the requests never stopped. Each time her parents said, "Only this once, only until we recover." Yet soon Amelia set up automatic payments, resigning herself to the role of silent savior. 36 transfers in total, over $70,000, every deduction slicing away at her dreams of someday owning a home of her own. At the dinner table, she watched her father's jaw tighten. He tried to reclaim authority, saying, "We never asked you to do that. If you chose to help, it was your decision, but bringing it up now is inappropriate." The word inappropriate hit her like a slap. A bitter laugh escaped before she could stop it. 3 years of sacrifice, and now they wanted to erase it as though it had been nothing more than an optional kindness. She felt the sting of invisibility return, sharper than ever. Her mother added quickly, "You have always been too sensitive. We never thought you less important, but Clara's achievements are easier for others to see." Amelia's chest ached. Her gaze fell to the table, then lifted again with new clarity. It was not about the money, not about the $70,000 that had vanished from her account. It was about never being seen, never being acknowledged, always existing in the shadow of her sister. She whispered softly, almost more to herself than to them, "Why am I always just a shadow?" Her parents gave no answer. Clara fiddled with her napkin, unable to meet her eyes. Amelia realized then that recognition might never come from them. She drew a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the chair until her knuckles turned white, and spoke the words that felt like severing a lifetime of invisible chains. "I am done." Her father's face hardened, his voice low and cutting. "If you leave now, do not come back." The sentence struck like a blade, yet strangely Amelia did not crumble. She felt the line drawn clear, no longer blurred by guilt or duty. That night, after leaving in silence, she drove through the city lights back to her small apartment. She sat at her dining table, opened her laptop, and stared at the automatic transfers still scheduled in her account. Her hand shook as she hovered over the cancel button. When she finally pressed yes, a strange hollowness washed over her. Pain, yes, but also relief. For 3 years, she had defined herself as the dutiful daughter who sacrificed. Now, by ending it, she was stepping into the unknown. She pulled out a folder she had kept tucked away, filled with printed bank statements, every payment marked and dated. Spread across the table, the numbers glared back at her. 500 here, 1,000 there, some months nearly 2,000. She added them up with a pencil, the total staring back at her. $72,000. That sum could have been the down payment for her own apartment. It could have been freedom. Instead, it had become a silent burden she carried while being told she was never enough. She sat in the dim light of her apartment, staring at the papers. Tears came, but they were different now. Not just grief, but a rising clarity. She had been erased from her family's story, but she would not allow herself to erase her own. Amelia sat there long into the night, the papers spread before her like evidence in a trial only she could see. The numbers glared back at her, sharp and unyielding, each one a reminder of how much she had given away. For years, she had convinced herself it was temporary, that one day her parents would recover, and she would reclaim her savings. Yet here she was, with nothing but a stack of statements and an ache in her chest. She whispered to the empty room, "That money should have been for my own home." The words hung in the air, heavy yet strangely liberating. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future untethered to obligation. She closed the folder, stood up, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands trembled, but beneath the trembling pulsed a quiet current of relief. She had cut the cord. No more automatic withdrawals, No more late-night texts pleading for help. For once, she had chosen herself. The next morning, instead of rushing to the office with a heavy heart, she pulled on running shoes and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that woke every sense. She jogged along the river that wound through the city, her breath visible in the cool morning light. With every step, it felt as though layers of weight were peeling off her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she was moving forward not for her parents, not to chase Clara's shadow, but simply for herself. She began making small changes in her life, almost without realizing it. On Thursdays, she signed up for a cooking class at the community center. In that brightly lit kitchen, surrounded by strangers chopping vegetables and laughing at burned bread, no one knew her as the overshadowed sister. They knew her simply as Amelia, a woman who loved experimenting with soups and laughed at her clumsy attempts at pastries. It was in those moments she realized how refreshing it was to be seen without comparison, valued not for duty but for presence. On weekends, she joined a group of hikers who explored the trails around the mountains. Standing at the summit, staring across an endless sweep of green forest, she felt her lungs expand with more than just air. She felt alive in a way she hadn't since childhood, unburdened, no longer carrying the invisible debts of her family. Each view from the mountaintop reminded her she had a world beyond the narrow confines of her parents' expectations. Her evenings transformed too. Instead of poring over spreadsheets of her parents' mortgage, she curled up with novels, brewed tea, and listened to the hum of the city beyond her window. The silence no longer pressed on her like guilt. It welcomed her, gave her space to breathe. Slowly, she was rediscovering who she was outside of her family's shadow. Work began to shift as well. Free from the suffocating pressure of unspoken obligation, she poured herself into her projects. She stayed late by choice, not because she had to prove herself, but because she wanted to. One evening, as she pored over financial reports long after most of her coworkers had gone home, the company director walked by. He paused, studied her dedication, and smiled. "This company needs more people like you, Amelia." That simple sentence, casual and unadorned, filled her with more validation than years of her mother's comparisons. Within weeks, she was promoted to lead a new project team. Standing in the conference room, presenting her analysis to the board, her voice carried stronger than she had ever known it could. When the meeting ended in applause, she walked out with a lightness in her step. For the first time, she was not a shadow. She was her own person, standing in her own light. Then one evening, an email arrived that changed everything. A fintech startup in another city had noticed her work and wanted her to join as director of financial analysis. The salary was more than 40% higher, with shares in the company and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. Amelia printed the email and placed it on her kitchen table. She stared at it for hours, torn between fear and exhilaration. Accepting meant leaving behind the city that had shaped her adult life, but it also meant stepping fully into her own worth. She remembered the folder of statements, the nights of silence at the dinner table, the words "you are not even half your sister." A voice inside her whispered, "It is time." She called her closest friend, who screamed with joy on the other end of the line. "Amelia, this is your chance. You have to take it. You deserve it." Amelia smiled through tears she hadn't expected, opened her laptop, and typed the words that would change everything. "I accept." In the weeks that followed, Amelia's life became a whirlwind of transition. She walked through the familiar streets of Rosewood with a new awareness, as though seeing them for the last time. She lingered at her favorite cafe near the old bridge, sipping coffee by the window and watching the world move around her. She stopped at the bookstore, where she used to browse on rainy Sundays, touching the spines of novels she had once promised herself she would read. Each stop was a quiet farewell, a reminder that she was shedding the skin of a life bound by old chains. Packing her apartment turned into a ritual of release. Each box she filled was a marker of transformation, every item wrapped in paper, a fragment of her past. She paused often, staring at the bare walls as they emerged beneath the frames she took down. There was no sadness in her chest this time, only a steady sense of lightness. For so long she had carried the weight of her parents' burdens, but now she was free to carry only what belonged to her. On her final morning in the city, she laced up her running shoes one last time and jogged along the riverbank. The water shimmered beneath the rising sun, the mist curling upward like a curtain slowly lifting. Her breath came fast, her heart hammered in her chest, but it was not from exhaustion, it was joy, pure and unfiltered, the thrill of running towards something instead of away from it. She paused at the bridge, leaned against the railing, and whispered into the breeze, "This is for me." Moving to the bustling heart of Emerald Bay, she stepped into a new rhythm almost immediately. The fintech startup was everything it had promised, fast-paced, demanding, filled with brilliant minds who valued skill over pedigree. Here, no one cared about family legacies or golden children. They cared about numbers, strategy, and results, all areas where Amelia thrived. For the first time in her career, her voice carried weight in rooms where decisions shaped futures. The hours were long, but they filled her with energy rather than draining her. She thrived under the challenge, pushing herself in ways she had never dared before. Her colleagues respected her quickly, not because of who she was related to, but because of what she delivered. With each project completed, each analysis presented, Amelia felt the invisible wounds of her past begin to knit together. She was no longer just a daughter striving for acknowledgement, she was a professional carving her own name into the world. 6 months slipped by in a blur of work and discovery. One evening, as she sat on the balcony of her new apartment overlooking the sparkling skyline, she opened her personal spreadsheet. She added up her savings and paused, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time in her life, she had enough for a down payment. The realization hit her with such force, she laughed out loud, tears stinging her eyes. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights staring at dwindling numbers, and now here it was a future she could claim. Meeting with the real estate agent felt surreal. They toured a series of apartments, spacious units with no natural light, bright ones too far from the city center, cozy spaces that lacked a certain spark. She was patient, unwilling to settle. She had sacrificed too much to choose something that didn't feel right. Then, one afternoon, they stepped into a modest apartment on the 16th floor of a new tower. Amelia froze at the sight. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city spread out beneath her, the iconic tower gleaming in the distance against a canvas of blue sky. The space wasn't large, just one bedroom with polished wooden floors and a compact kitchen, but sunlight filled every corner. She stepped onto the balcony, the breeze cool on her face, and knew instantly, this was home. The process of buying it was meticulous, each signature another step toward reclaiming what had been denied her for so long. When the final contract was signed, the keys pressed into her hand, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The metal felt cold against her palm, yet sweeter than anything she had ever held. On the day she moved in, she dropped her bag onto the bare floor and stood in the center of the living room. Sunlight streamed across the empty walls. The city hummed below, alive and vibrant, but inside the apartment there was peace. She whispered, "This is mine." Not through silence, not through erasure, not by sacrificing my dreams for someone else, mine. Over the next weeks, she shaped the apartment into her own reflection. A light gray sofa, a sturdy oak table, a tall bookshelf cradling her favorite novels, a few green plants scattered near the window. On the wall, she hung a painting of her old city, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what she had overcome. Each item she chose with care, not because of price, but because it resonated with her. One evening, she poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony as the sky burned orange with sunset. She snapped a photo of the glowing tower in the distance and posted it with a short caption, "A new beginning." The picture was simple, but to her it was a declaration. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. A message appeared from Clara. "You are really something. Why didn't you tell the family?" Amelia stared at the words, her chest tightening with an old, familiar mix of hurt and defiance. The tone was not congratulatory but edged with something colder, almost resentful. She typed a reply, then deleted it. For the first time, she realized she didn't owe an explanation. She placed the phone face down on the table and turned up the soft jazz playing from her speakers. She no longer needed recognition. The proof was all around her. She settled onto her new sofa, the city lights flickering beyond the glass, and let herself smile. For the first time in years, the smile was not forced, not fragile, it was whole. She was no longer the sister in the shadows. She was Amelia, the woman who had built her own life, who now sat in her own home, finally free. One Saturday afternoon, while Amelia was arranging books on her tall new shelf, her phone rang with a name she hadn't expected to see: Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor who had lived across the street from her parents for decades. Amelia hesitated before answering, a small knot of unease tightening in her stomach. "Amelia, dear," the older woman said warmly, though there was a faint hesitation in her tone. "I hope you're well. I thought you should know something. I just passed your parents' house and saw a banner hanging out front. Quite a sight. I'll send you a picture." Before Amelia could respond, her phone buzzed again with a message. She opened it and felt her breath catch. There, stretched across the familiar porch, a white banner with bold red letters read, "Congratulations, Clara, for preserving the family home." Amelia's knees nearly buckled. She sat down hard on the sofa, staring at the image until it blurred through her tears. A flood of memories surged: late nights calculating transfers, her mother's desperate whispers of, "just this once," the total she had counted over and over again, $72,000. And now all of it had been erased, rewritten to glorify her sister. It wasn't just neglect anymore. This was betrayal. Her parents weren't ignoring her sacrifices, they were actively handing the credit to Clara, as if Amelia had never carried the weight at all. She felt heat rise in her chest, her hands trembling with a mix of grief and fury. For years she had been invisible, but this was worse. This was being erased completely. Through the haze of rage, something inside her shifted. She could not let this stand. She would not allow a false story to become the family's truth. She still had the folder of statements, every transfer receipt neatly printed and dated, every desperate message saved. She had evidence, undeniable and unshakable. That night, Amelia spread the documents across her dining table once again. She scanned every statement into her computer, creating a timeline that stretched from the winter when it began to the most recent payment she had canceled. She added charts showing the monthly transfers, bar after bar, climbing steadily across the years. At the bottom of the page, the final number glared: $72,000. She didn't stop there. She copied her mother's text messages, those pleading words that had once broken her resolve. "Just this once. If not, the bank will take the house." She placed them beneath the chart, adding the caption, "Once became 36 times." When she finished compiling it all into a professional report, her chest heaved with exhaustion, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She knew her parents would deny it, twist it, try to shame her again. But this time she had more than her voice. She had the truth laid out in black and white. Days later, her cousin Sarah called. Of all the relatives, Sarah was the only one who kept in touch. "Amelia," she whispered, "your parents are planning a family appreciation dinner here in Emerald Bay. They asked me to put together a slideshow." Amelia clenched her jaw. "And who's being appreciated?" "You can guess," Sarah sighed. "They want to celebrate Clara for saving the house." The betrayal cut deeper with each word. But then Sarah added, "Honestly, it feels wrong. If you want, I can send you the slideshow file. Maybe you could suggest changes?" Amelia agreed quietly. When the file arrived, she scrolled through the images. The family house glowing in sunlight, Clara smiling on the porch, captions praising her as the savior of the home. The final slide read in bold, "Thank you, Clara, for preserving our family." Amelia closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, then copied the file and created her own version. She left every photo untouched, every caption unchanged until the end. There she added her sequence. First, a timeline of transfers, then the bar chart of 3 years of payments, then screenshots of her mother's desperate messages. And finally, a photo of the house with a single line beneath it: "This was my contribution. Do not erase it." Running the slideshow left her heart pounding, not with fear but with certainty. She saved it onto a USB drive, printed the report, and tucked both into her bag. She rehearsed in her mind what she would say. "If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault." On the night of the dinner, she parked outside the glowing restaurant, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Inside, she could already hear laughter and clinking glasses. She sat for a moment, gathering strength, then whispered to herself, "Tonight they will see me." The restaurant shimmered with golden light, its tall windows revealing tables dressed in white linen, glasses sparkling under chandeliers. From the parking lot, Amelia could see the silhouettes of her relatives gathered inside, their movements animated with conversation and celebration. Her palms dampened against the steering wheel, her breath shallow. For a brief second, the urge to turn the key and drive away surged inside her. But then she remembered the banner, the $72,000, the years of silence. No, this time she would not disappear. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, heels clicking against the pavement. Each step steadied her resolve. Inside the hall, her father stood at the head of a long table, a microphone in hand, his voice warm and full of authority. Her mother sat beside him, her smile stretched wide, her eyes shining. Clara, in a deep green dress, looked radiant, every detail of her appearance carefully polished. The sight made Amelia's chest tighten, but she held her head high. "We are so fortunate," her father announced, his tone brimming with pride. "To have Clara, the daughter who preserved our family home, who ensured our legacy endured." Applause broke out across the room, relatives leaning in, nodding approvingly. The slideshow began on the large screen, images of the house glowing in summer light, Clara beaming on the porch, captions praising her sacrifice. Amelia remained near the doorway, hidden in the shadows, her fists clenched. Each slide was a reminder of the falsehood now being cemented as truth. When the final slide appeared, "Thank you, Clara, for preserving our family," the screen flickered. And then, as Amelia had planned, the new sequence began. First, a stark white background with bold black letters, "Financial contributions, 3 years." The room went silent. Forks hovered mid-air, glasses lowered slowly to the table. A bar chart appeared, each column a record of monthly payments. Gasps echoed across the hall. Then came the screenshots of her mother's messages, her desperate pleas. "Just this once, please. If not, the bank will take the house." Murmurs spread like wildfire through the guests. Faces turned, eyes darting between the screen and Amelia's parents. Amelia pushed open the door and walked inside. The echo of her heels on the wooden floor was the only sound for a moment, steady and unshaken. She stopped at the end of the table, lifted her chin, and let her voice carry clearly. "If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault." The silence deepened, thick and suffocating. Then, from one corner of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another followed. Soon the sound spread, hesitant at first but gathering strength, applause filling the hall. Amelia's father gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles pale, his face drained. Her mother sat frozen, lips trembling, eyes shimmering with tears she tried to blink away. Clara's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes lowered to the floor, her shoulders shaking under the weight of exposure. Amelia took another step forward, pointing to the number still glowing on the screen. 3 years, $72,000. Without those payments, the house would have been gone. You know it. I know it, but you chose silence. You chose to give the credit to someone else. Tonight, let the whole family hear the truth. Whispers rippled across the tables. An uncle leaned toward his wife. "I remember Amelia working so late back then. Now I understand why." An aunt shook her head. How could they let her carry it all and never speak of it? Amelia turned her gaze on her parents, her voice steady. "This is the truth. This is the person who kept the house alive. No one can erase that." Applause rose again, stronger this time, several relatives even rising to their feet. Clara looked up at Amelia, her eyes wet, silently pleading for some sign of forgiveness. But Amelia stood firm, offering nothing. She had not come to comfort or to reconcile. She had come to be seen. Her mother's voice broke the silence at last, soft and trembling. "Amelia." Amelia shook her head gently. "I told you already. The truth is not my fault." She turned, walked back toward the door, and stepped into the cool night air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, sharp and glittering. For the first time in years, she felt the weight slide from her shoulders. No gloating, no triumph, only relief. Tonight she had spoken, and they could never erase her again. 2 days passed before Amelia heard another word from her parents. She had expected silence to stretch longer, perhaps forever. Yet on a gray afternoon, a knock rattled the door of her apartment. She froze when she saw them through the peephole, her mother in a heavy coat, her father standing stiffly at her side, both of them looking smaller than she had ever seen. Their eyes carried exhaustion, the kind that comes from nights without sleep. She opened the door slowly. They stepped inside hesitantly, their gazes darting around her bright, uncluttered apartment. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of their old house, where tension clung to the walls like dust. Her mother spoke first, voice trembling. "Amelia, I am sorry. We were wrong to stay silent, wrong to let you carry so much without recognition. We did not realize how much you had given." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "After that night, we talked. We want to add your name to the deed. You deserve it. You kept the house alive." For a moment, Amelia simply stared, her heart aching with the old longing to be seen, to be valued. Years ago, those words might have broken her open with relief. But now, in her own home, she realized she no longer needed them. She shook her head gently. "I have a home now, Mom. I have my own life. I don't need to be tied to the past anymore." Her mother's lips quivered as tears welled, while her father shifted uncomfortably, his throat tightening. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. "But that house stands because of you. You should take what is yours." Amelia's reply came steady, firm, but not unkind. "What I deserve is not a name on paper. What I deserve is respect, and you did not give me that. I don't need to prove anything more. I already have everything I need through my own effort." Silence filled the room, thick and unsteady. Her parents exchanged glances, their faces lined with guilt and age. Amelia felt no triumph, only clarity. She was not the child desperate for their approval anymore. She was a woman who had built her own life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. After they left, she sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer on the distant river. Memories flickered the countless nights she had wired money in silence, the bitterness of hearing Clara praised while her own efforts went unspoken, the crushing moment she saw the banner hanging outside her childhood home. Each wound, each sacrifice had led her here, and for the first time, she did not regret them. They had carved her into someone resilient, someone strong enough to let go. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let the sound of the wind ease into her breath. An old chapter had ended. No longer the shadow behind her sister, she was Amelia Hart, the woman who had kept her parents' house alive but, more importantly, had kept herself whole. As the night deepened, she understood a truth she wished she could whisper to every person who had ever felt unseen. Your value does not come from the labels others pin on you. It lives in the resilience you build, in the courage to keep walking when unrecognized, in choosing your own path even when it costs you. She smiled then, not the tight, practiced smile she used to wear at family dinners, but a soft, unforced one that belonged only to her. Beyond the glass, the skyline glowed. And in that glow, Amelia felt lighter than she had ever been, finally free to live by her own story.